with no further ado, the idea here is that we have identified that there are some missing markets and market failures. And clearly there is a problem of information to consumers and information to farmers, which are linked to the willingness to pay and are also linked to the incentives through prices that producers need to be able to comply with those minimum standards, which sometimes requires a minimum investment that not necessarily can be covered for smallholders, and that's how the vertical coordination or the horizontal coordination will help to resolve those problems. So let me now move to Dr. Leszek Borisis. He's Vice Chancellor of the University of Cambridge, and he will be talking on health risks related to agriculture and markets.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to start with a proposition that isn't mine, but actually placed by Jared Diamond in his book on collapse, how societies choose to fail or survive. You remember his major proposition was that environmental failure led to reduced production, led to disease, led to collapse of society. Now, to an extent, I agree with him, but it's also clear to me from my own experience working in rural Africa as an infectious diseases specialist that in fact health can trigger these collapses much more so than he gives credit to in his book. The best example, the collapse of fishing communities on Lake Victoria as a consequence of HIV, where you have actually loss of manpower and productivity due to a major epidemic that occurred in that area. The hypothesis is that this cannot be taken in isolation. What I'm going to propose to you is that we have to look at this as a form of triangulation. The triangulation that exists is between food production, the community, and health. And the tragedy of this is that this is an extremely fragile dynamic. An attack on any one of these elements will damage all of the others. And if a community cannot sustain agriculture or buy agricultural products from elsewhere by excess being produced in terms of agriculture, then nutrition will suffer and the structure of the community will change, and the priorities within that community will change. If health is under attack, it becomes difficult to sustain agriculture and education, and then if education collapses, then the community itself is going to disintegrate. So if you take that microcosm of a village community, this works in a completely interdependent system. Clear-cut example of the fragility of this system is well exemplified by wheat monoculture. What we have here is the vulnerability of a particular crop. We've got this hexaploid crop on which 60% of the nutritional value actually depends. And yet, as was pointed out by Dr. Borlaug, who worked in relationship to the Green Revolution in India, the onset of black stem rust in a monoculture system had immense potential for both social and human destruction. And you only have to look back as to what was the underlying cause of the sudden rise in wheat prices from the previous hike-up, and look at the impact on that on particular communities. Great if your wheat survived and you could get additional economic benefit, but for most communities it did not survive particularly well. Now, having said all of that, I'm actually no pessimist. And Jared similarly makes the case that while there is a trajectory for collapse within societies, it is not linear and it is by no means inevitable. For me, therefore, that has to be a call to action, and one in which we have to take some optimism. Now, in my current job, it's a long way from the communities I used to work with in Senegal and the Gambia. The office where I sit in Cambridge is often surrounded by thousands of individuals walking past in a day. They're some of the best brains in the world, make no bones about that. But actually when you ask them what they really want to work towards, they do want to work towards a better world. The motivation at academic level is extreme, and it's very, very real. So we have to work towards solutions, and from my perspective I have to ask the question, what is the role of the university in trying to help promote that type of activity? Well, normally you would start as an academic from the need to understand how to attack the problem, because the triangle I've imagined represents a problem in multiple dimensions. Any imaginable solution to the problem will need to be holistic and exist in the same dimensions as the problem. In other words, a cross-disciplinary solution to a cross-disciplinary problem, not a siloed solution. It needs health specialists, educationists, social scientists, agronomists, on and on and on, the list goes on. And from my perspective, the university is an ideal starting point, particularly the larger universities, provided they can work with local enterprises effectively downstream. Researchers with disciplines come together and create interdisciplinary strategic initiatives. That's the way of every modern university. I think the old-fashioned idea that universities work in silos has got to be put to bed. The universities have moved on a long, long way. If you take a siloed model as a university today, you're dead in the water. To remain globally competitive as a university, you have to think outside silos, create interdisciplinary institutes and move forward. Not a bad starting point to try to tackle this issue. The second issue that I'd like to just dwell on a little is the issue that this triangulation is more complex than even appears in a multidisciplinary ways, because in fact there is a fourth dimension. And the fourth dimension is that this is an ever-changing dynamic. I mean, remember, this problem that we're talking about first started when the agrarian revolution occurred somewhere in the basin of Mesopotamia, way back in Paleolithic times. It was a problem for Stone Age man then. How do you actually get sufficient production? To a problem today. And I'm going to tell you that, despite being an optimist, this problem will not go away. And although the problem may change, the problem will continue. So short-term solutions, or thinking we can create a fund and fix the problem, I have to tell you, I don't think we're ever going to fix this problem, because we haven't in 4,000 or 5,000 years, and I don't think we're going to fix it today. But we have to work on it, because the populations are totally dependent on our answers. In a way, you've seen those puzzles the children very often have, where you take a hammer and you hit one block and something else pops up for the child to hit again. This is the very nature of the problem we actually have here. It has unpredictability. We want to develop systems that are predictable in outcome. Governments want to put a tax on something because it's a predictable outcome. Any mathematician will tell you we're dealing with a chaotic system where pull just one lever, you do not know the consequences of pulling the lever that you actually pull. So be prepared for some chaotic behavior around this system. And I'll only highlight one, and it is, from my perspective, the disproportionality that exists in communicable diseases in rural societies. Still a real problem, but I'm going to give you a prediction. Within 5 years, even in rural communities here in India, that is going to be overtaken by non-communicable diseases. 340 million avoidable deaths in the next 10 years. 80% of that burden falls on less developed countries, not on the developed worlds. These are not diseases of affluence anymore. They're diseases that are of global significance. 60% of all avoidable deaths in non-communicable diseases exist in the developing world. And yet we have healthcare systems that are orientated towards infectious diseases, quick fixes, and not actually thinking about the healthcare culture that we need to promote downstream. Just ponder the impact on productivity of psychiatric disease. Never mentioned. Cinderella specialties. 8% of the population of India will need access to psychiatric care sometime in their lives. And the longer they live, the more likely they are to need it. Productivity suffers with psychiatric disease. We know from Western societies, most patients with serious psychiatric illness move to the bottom of the socioeconomic spectrum. Just imagine that happening within smaller communities heavily dependent on an agricultural system, when there is no way in which that health is delivered unless you reorientate healthcare. And the costs don't even bear thinking about. You can see what's escalated, but as a fraction of GDP in Western societies, that is an unsustainable model. Therefore, local delivery and local care systems are vital. So in finishing, I'm actually going to say that university researchers tackle real-world problems all the time. Don't think you're discovering something new. They do it, and they do it in an interdisciplinary way. They also are increasingly do it in a local context. One of the reasons I'm here in India is actually to look to forge the partnerships that a university like Cambridge needs to have to help resolve some of these issues. We can put some input into it, but we need the local input into it, and the local knowledge and the local expertise and academic expertise that already exists in strengths here. But if you think what the consequences might be if we do nothing, that's the worst of all. And I'm going to finish not with my own words, but with a poem that has stuck with me ever since I first read it as a schoolboy. I do have a predilection for the romantic poets of Britain, and I'm going to refer to the words of Shelley, written in 1818. And the poem's entitled Ozymandias. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed." And on the pedestal these words appear: "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. No thing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." If that's the vision we don't want of societies today, then we've got to act now, and act in the knowledge that we actually have to develop the interdisciplinarity, the knowledge base, and work together with what communities need to try to resolve the problems that we face.
Thank you so much for bringing this concept of triangulation, complexity of triangulation, and unpredictability, and the need to act quickly and to bring interdisciplinarity to be able to resolve these problems. Now let me invite Bhushana Karandikar, is an agribusiness strategist from Maha Grapes, and she will bring the example of Maha Grapes and how through certification they were able to cope with some of these problems.
Let me thank first to IFRI for offering me this opportunity to put forward my expertise to such a learned audience, and thank you for being the audience for Dr. Lezik's such a poetic speech. Thank you so much. And thank you, sir, to you also to get rid of PowerPoint presentations. I'm here to tell you about certification schemes that are in India. I think every civilization has its own ideas of food safety, but as we are in global and more liberated world, we have got some standard certification that are coming up. In India, we did have a certification, it's called AGMAR, but it was mainly a government certification, and it is mainly operating in comparatively lower value conversion, that is cereals or flour, oil, in that stratum. What the certification schemes that I'm talking about, I will be talking about, refer to fresh produce. This is a new concept in India. As we have seen from Pika's lecture, it's fresh produce as such is a very delicate, perishable goods. It requires a very intricate handling. And naturally, in India, we don't have any certification for fresh produce in domestic market. But we have in export market, that is global gap certification that we are using mainly to export it to EU. Of course, there are many certifications available. One is GI, geographical indicator, where there is of course a fair trade certification, but I am referring mainly which are related to us, that is nutrition and health. So to start with, all of us, we have been talking about small farmers. So my first message is, yes, small and marginal farmers can do it. They can very well abide with the certification. That's not an issue. The institution that I represent, we have got 2,500 farmers, and almost all of them are what we call as a small and marginal farmers. Global Gap, as we all of you must be knowing, is a certification. It's a private standard. It's a private certification. When we started exporting grapes, and mind you, this Maha Grapes is purely, it's all farmers' body. It's not a private sector, or we don't have very large investments or something. It's a purely farmers' body, but it's a marketing partner of producers' cooperatives. We have got a very strong producers association. Grape is actually the only commodity which is on the on par with international productivity in India. And more than that, I'm so proud that all these farmers, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, they came together, they are very passionate, and they developed their own system so that they fine-tune the table grape production it's so well that it's almost like precision. So for certification, as there was already the dialogue between the farmers, we didn't have that much of a problem. The dissemination of information was going on. I mean, it was already existing. I think that's a very necessary precondition to be successful, that you should have a very vibrant farmer-to-farmer dialogue. The second is that, of course, access to information. I've got just two little comments, as I said earlier, that we have been exporting grapes for last 20 years, but what we have seen, global gap came earlier, it was referred as Eurogap, is that EU norms are changing too fast. Market is changing too fast. I mean, in 1999, we were testing for 16 chemicals, and today we have to test for 163 chemicals. 163, all are small farmers, all are marginal farmers. So it requires, of course, when there is, as already said, that when there is enough of a incentive, enough of a market, if I'm getting good market price, yes, I will do it. But how long? I mean, there is a limit ultimately to go for all such things also. Secondly, certification as such is, it is a process. It's a process, it's a bundle of protocol. So in one sense, in earlier standards, it was just fat percentage or just the size or whatever it contained. Now, as it is a process certificate, it requires even elaborate handling and, of course, more cost because of that. Most of us are, not most, all of us are having something called group certification, so that we can share the cost and we can get the certificate. As I said earlier, that what I see the future of this global gap or any European standard is that I just don't know when they will stop. I mean, after 163 chemicals, I don't know how many other chemicals they can find out. But the current position is such that we are finding it very difficult to have access as an infrastructure. I mean, you need labs to test all these chemicals. So that particular investment is going again on and somewhere. And secondly, I request all the audiences that the compliance cost is going, it's going haywire. That's the situation of global gap. I have only 5 minutes, so I will immediately come back to another certification. That is the future, that's another certification that is by the food processing industry. As for India, the farm size is shrinking, and earlier, because of our, I'm talking of pre-90 days, we had certain kind of size limitation for canning industry or food processing industry. It was reserved for our small sector. Now it is no longer so. So our food processing industries are getting bigger and bigger. So really what certification this acts is as an aggregator. Once, as Pippa mentioned, that urbanization, and it really requires the facelessness. A grape will look like a grape, a mango will look like a mango, but how do I know that it is a safe mango or it is a mango full of nutrition? I will know if it is certified. So again, this food industries also are more export oriented. The final product is exported, and that's why they are insisting on certified agriculture inputs, and one such example is that of VADI program we have got by BAIF, Bharati Agro Industries Foundation, is the largest NGO, and they run a program for a small tribal farmer where I work. It's 1 acre, that is half a hectare, and mangoes are produced, and because it's tribal, because by default, so we get it certified. We got it certified as a part of CSR, Corporate Social Responsibility, from ITC, the same company that is eChaupal, that runs eChaupal, and they buy those certified mangoes from us, and that's it's a sizable quantity, 1,000 tons. I can see this as a future. I mean, almost all the companies, PepsiCo does it for potatoes, Jain Group does it for onions. I can see that certification that is coming. Again, my message is the same. Small farmers, of course, they can do it. If given proper knowledge, I think knowledge and information is the real dearth, is the real key gap in the whole scenario. If that is given, we can very well definitely come up with this certification. Okay, so what are the effects of the certification? One, of course, is a safe food, maybe for the EU consumers, but yes, safe food for EU consumers, and a safe food, safe processed food for EU consumers. And I think another spillover effect that we really tend to forget is that due to increase in money, probably there is better nutrition. This is, of course, it's my observation. I don't have a very detailed study on that, but I'm sure that they do get more money because of certification, and that's why they get more. That's one thing. And another thing is that of the global gap, you might be knowing that the provision of toilets and the farm labor facilities should be there on the farm. So even that message is taken at home, and that is also an added benefit, as I can see. But this spillover benefits after this certification, again, currently certification schemes that are successful are really export oriented. We don't have anything, the domestic certification in India. But in future, I can very well see domestic certification to play key role. The study that which Pippa referred, we did it in Mumbai, whether India is ready for certification, and our finding was very clear that yes, we are ready. And we did it for the comparatively lower income. I mean, we have been hearing about change in consumption pattern. I'm just taking the same theme. Yes, change in now Indian domestic market also needs certification, and of course everyone needs safe food. But when with certification, it is very clear. It becomes very easy that yes, this is what it is, and I will go for it. So there is definitely a market. And so my another thing is that I seriously look forward, and in 5 years, I think this will really hope is that all the certification for export-oriented certification, the compliance cost is getting so high, and when the domestic certificate comes, these two certificates will pit against each other. And I will be happy because the farmers will get, I'm sure, get much more money, definitely better returns, and I believe that there is a definitely need for the domestic certification. And as you know, of course, public safety laws and food safety laws, we do have now a very elaborate structure in place, so that will also play a definitely better role. Thank you once again.